Hello. Bonjour. J'ai lu maintenant le grand mise à jour économique au printemps, la première fois. We're so used to a spring budget and a fall economic statement. We have to get used to the new excitement. Elizabeth May, Leader of the Green Party of Canada. I'm so pleased to be joined by Mike Morris, Deputy Leader of the Green Party of Canada and candidate for Kitchener Centre, whenever, to be back here as MP, and also an agricultural economist. You may know, I know my husband, John Kidder, who's also been perusing the economic statement. It will be Mike and I who speak to it. Maintenant, je veux dire, selon le Parti vert du Canada, que nous sommes déçus avec la mise à jour économique du printemps de 2026. Malheureusement, il n'y a rien ici pour les grands besoins du Canada et contre la crise climatique. We are astonished in many ways that this document is as sanguine as it is about the geopolitical turmoil, the price of oil. For instance, the spring economic statement, I'll have to constantly correct myself on that. I hope I'm not the only one. The spring economic statement makes astonishing projections that, we're not going to see the price of oil more than $15 a barrel more than it was for the November budget that we had. We know that the war that was launched by the U.S. and Israel has upended projections for oil prices, it's upended projections for inflation, it's created vast economic uncertainty. But this budget projects a sense that all is good, steady hand at the tiller, no one needs to worry, we can all go to sleep in our beds safe as Canadians. I think we can actually go to sleep in our beds safe as Canadians. I think that's due to the resilience of the Canadian citizenry, due to our faith in each other. But the efforts by the current government to, for instance, take credit for the fact that we went from a $78 billion deficit projection last fall to $65 billion this year, it isn't, in our view, good, prudent financial management by the Government of Canada that has reduced the deficit, but rather the reality that a November budget left very little time to spend all the money projected to be spent. So the budget now, the spring economic statement reduces what we expected as a deficit to $65 billion. Hardly record lows for deficit, not record highs. We look at this, and I'm frankly astonished that we had the grandiose announcement yesterday that we're going to have a new Canadian sovereign wealth fund, and we'd find all the details when we get the spring economic statement. So here's the details. There aren't any. The details are we're now going to have a Build Canada Strong Fund transition office. So there will be a Build Canada Strong transition office to do consultations and at some point in the undisclosed future tell us how it's going to work, how Canadians can invest in it, how it's going to work. It's clear for now that unlike Norway's sovereign wealth fund, which was based on taxation of oil revenue, this is based on, once again, borrowing money to create a new fund. $25 billion of debt to create a Canada Strong Fund, and we don't know how it's going to work yet. It was very similar. I keep hoping that we're eventually going to see follow through on something that was in the introduction to the November 4th budget. If you missed it, it was at page 19, said one of the great things we can do as a country to build Canada strong will be a northwest, east-south electricity grid to really have a strong electricity grid in Canada. Le réseau électrique, c'est quelque chose de tellement important. Nous avons besoin d'un réseau électrique qui marche. C'est un des éléments des solutions contre la crise du changement climatique. Nous avons c'est un grand besoin. We really need a north-south, east-west electricity grid that works for Canada. So we get a commitment in this document to a discussion paper will be released soon. Now, this is after being teased with this announcement several times by the Prime Minister over the last year, and now we know at some point, an undisclosed future moment, we will get a discussion document. What we don't see in this budget is what's needed for Canadian youth facing almost unprecedented levels of unemployment. What we don't see in this budget is an extension for pharmacare, for really providing the kind of supports Canadians need against the increased costs and the challenges of affordability. But bottom line, if we don't deal with the climate crisis on an urgent basis at a time when scientists are warning us that tipping points are in the near term, potentially with catastrophic permanent shifts in our global climate, and yet this budget has nothing new for renewable energy. Not a penny of new money. There's still the tax credits we got from last year's budget, but solar, wind, renewable energy are ignored, but we're going to get a big nuclear energy strategy. No surprise. I'll turn it now to Mike Morris for his thoughts on today's spring economic statement.
Thank you, Elizabeth. While there's some good news for Canadian athletes in this spring economic update, besides the nice words, it's clear this budget isn't written for regular folks in my community and others across the country. It's certainly not written for parents who are on wait lists for affordable childcare. They will continue to wait. It's certainly not written for those struggling with the rising cost of grocery prices. Besides a rebranded and bumped up GST credit, nothing else for them. It's certainly not for folks with disabilities, seniors and others living below the poverty line. They're going to continue to wait in the same position. It's not for the young people that are facing sky-high unemployment, as Elizabeth just mentioned. And it's also not for those who are having a hard time getting to work because transit might not already serve them or fares might be too high. Instead, it's full of the same stale ideas and exemptions for all the same players. If you're a monopolistic grocery chain, well, you get passed over when it comes to a windfall profit tax the way other countries have already put into place. If you're amongst the super rich or a billionaire in this country who among 60 some odd people have as much wealth as the bottom 6.3 million Canadian families combined, they're not facing any new taxes of any kind on their fortunes. If you're a fossil fuel lobbyist or maybe a conservative floor crosser, well, you're getting new fossil fuel subsidies in this budget, including enhanced oil recovery. If you're one of the biggest corporations in the country, you continue to get bragged about for the lowest taxes in the G7. And if you're a housing developer, you're going to continue to get billions more in loans to use taxpayer money to build homes that most of us can't afford. As Greens, we're going to continue to work and fight for regular folks in communities across the country. Bref, en français aussi, quand on lit sur mise à jour économique de printemps, c'est clair que sauf les athlètes canadiennes, ce budget, ce n'est pas écrit pour monsieur et madame tout le monde. Comme les parents qui vont attendre encore pour les garderies abordables. C'est pas écrit pour les gens qui sont dans les situations de pauvreté, comme les gens en situation handicapée. C'est pas pour les gens qui utilisent le transport en commune, qui veulent plus de services et les faire éliminer. C'est vraiment clair que ce budget, c'est écrit pour les mêmes personnes comme toujours, avec les idées plus ou moins la même. C'est pour les super riches et les milliardaires qui encore ratent des impôts sur leurs richesses qui sont la même de les comme 60 à peu près familles milliardaires, la même richesse que les 6,3 millions Canadiens la plus pauvres autour du pays. Le budget, c'est pour les gens comme les gens qui créent le logement, mais pas le logement abordable. C'est le logement encore avec les prêts de nous pour créer les logements que monsieur, madame, tout le monde ne peut pas vivre là. Alors encore, comme Vert, nous travaillons pour tous les Canadiens, pour un Canada vraiment abordable et un Canada durable aussi. Merci.
Oui, nous sommes disponibles pour les questions en anglais ou en français.
If there is a budget or a Spring Update Implementation Act, is it fair to say that your vote would be no against it?
I have to read it because they have put out a table of legislative changes that are expected. And the one that I find alarming is the one that I am pleased to see that there will be a food security strategy, and that's referenced in the Spring Economic Statement. But what's not clear is why they need to amend the Pest Control Products Act to make food more affordable. So as somebody who's worked for a long time on the carcinogenic and health threats of pesticides, I am leery of changes to the Pest Control Products Act to make groceries more affordable. It might be wholesale cutting of what are really health and safety regulations to make food cheaper could be the line that's being reached here. I don't see why else the Pest Control Products Act is being listed as a place for legislative changes in the Budget Implementation Act. Just for a laugh, if you missed it, they're also going to change their Bill C-15 regulatory sandboxes to add another law that they're not allowed to break. While they create regulatory sandboxes, they'll now not be allowed to break the Official Languages Act. Newsflash. I'm not very excited about that one, but I want to read the fine print before I decide if I'm voting for the Budget Implementation Act. Would I vote for this Spring Economic Statement as a blueprint for Canada's future? No.
On the legislative changes, one thing they are proposing in there is the giving police the power to search mail, originally seen in C2, now being put into this. Just what do you make of the government putting the ability to search mail in an economic document?
Very concerning. It did come up, as you probably know, and those are off-the-record sessions. Parliamentarians are allowed to ask questions for more details to really push on things that aren't clear or to get clarifications or answers. That was one of the items that came up in our off-the-record session. Would there be a warrant required? There was no answer to that question. So yes, it concerns us as opposition MPs. And thanks for spotting it.
The budget has more details about carbon capture and storage for enhanced oil recovery. I know that was something that you were deeply concerned about before.
Well, it's why Stephen Guilbeault quit cabinet.
Sure. And where are you on that?
Well, page 348 is still there if you have a copy of November 4th's budget. They didn't use disappearing ink. Page 348 still says carbon capture and utilization and storage will be available for investment tax credits, but not enhanced oil recovery. In today's Spring Economic Statement, they actually provide a longish explanation of how we go from a commitment that enhanced oil recovery is not covered. In case anyone wants to know, this is at page 64. They explain that in the commitment in the MOU to the Alberta government, enhanced oil recovery will qualify for investment tax credits. That takes effect, we're now clarified to that point, that takes effect today with the tabling of this document. They then provide the misleading statement that it is estimated that the proposal to increase, that by providing a subsidy essentially for enhanced oil recovery, they claim, and if it's in black and white, will increase federal revenues by $395 million over 4 years. To clarify, I really did drill down on this quite a lot in our questioning to finance officials, because there's no way that an increased subsidy to oil and gas doesn't cost Canadian taxpayers money. It doesn't increase revenue. What they mean by using the term increased revenue, so stick with me for a minute because it took me a while to get this out of them. What they mean is they'll be spending relatively less because their previous carbon capture and storage concept, which did not include enhanced oil recovery, included paying for geological storage of carbon. Now that they don't have to store as much carbon because they're going to use that effort to pull up more oil out of the ground, and they're going to burn it. So they don't have to pay as much for storage. That's not increased revenue. So if you happen to see that on page 64, please don't write it as if it's true in your coverage of the spring economic statement. There is no increased revenue to the Government of Canada by increasing subsidies for enhanced oil recovery, violating the November 4th budget commitments, which are still in writing at page 348, to create a new subsidy to increase oil production for the benefit of big oil.
Given what you've said today about your concerns with this document and what you've said about your concerns about the government's moves to reformulate committees, can you just characterize for us how you feel the government is behaving now that it has a majority?
I feel that before they had a majority because astonishing things like passing laws that say we're allowed to break other laws that now exist, invoking the Henry VIII Clause in Bill C-5, astonishing and anti-democratic laws were passed very quickly because the Liberals and minority had the full support of the Conservative Party and things were pushed through. So I feel like I have been involved in multiple hit-and-run accidents involving a bulldozer.
A quick question for Mr. Morris. The Green Party is going to be selecting a new leader soonish. Soonish?
By fall, I'd say.
By fall? Do you intend to run?
Yeah, thanks for the question. The rules haven't been announced by federal council yet, and so I'm going to be watching what those rules end up looking like, and it's something I'm considering.
Something you're considering? Okay.
And it's not a newsflash, I'm not running. The rules haven't been announced, neither has the timeline. So what I just said about by fall is my speculation. I certainly hope that will be the case. We want to make sure that the Green Party of Canada has new leadership in place. I'll be serving that new leader as a member of Parliament on behalf of the voters of Saanich Gulf Islands, and I do intend to run again. I failed to give John Kidder's full introduction. He's also the nominated candidate for Kamloops Thompson Caribou. We are filling out a slate, and we're going to be ready whenever an election happens. Thank you.
Is this book, is it more or less worthy of getting stomped on than the budget?
Well, I got a lot of commitments out of the Prime Minister on November 17th before I voted for the budget, and it was 10 days later. So the things that I fought for, one of them was the nature strategy. So the $2.8 billion for the nature strategy was announced post-budget and pre when I voted for it. And what I'd also like to say is now we have the funding for the nature strategy, and I'm very pleased that the Spring Economic Statement includes enhanced funding for the endangered whales of both the East and West Coast. So I won't stomp on this, but I sure wouldn't vote for it.
Maybe I'll just offer a brief follow-up. David, to your question, as you know, I believe strongly that the Greens can be a vehicle to lift up the concerns of Canadians across the country at a time when a lot of folks are hurting. And I'm giving it consideration in terms of running, as you asked previously, in terms of this being an opportunity to lift up those concerns and do so in a way, as you've seen from folks like Elizabeth and others across the country, that we can do it without tearing each other down, doing it in a cooperative way, but also taking on some of the interests I mentioned that continue. In my time here as an MP and in this spring update today, we see some of the same players holding power over folks in my community that deserve a lot better. And I've seen Greens able to be a force for good, to lift up the voices of regular people, and I'm considering to the extent that I could continue to do that if rules are announced, and that's for the Federal Council to decide. Thank you all again.
Thank you. Over to you.
Bien le bonjour. Nous sommes jour pour jour au premier anniversaire de l'élection du premier ministre Carney et la réélection du Parti libéral du Canada avec comme engagement fondamental, en invoquant une expertise unique et inégalable, de disposer rapidement de l'enjeu des tarifs et de la crise commerciale. D'autres crises sont arrivées par la suite. Sur le front des tarifs, rappelons-nous qu'il y a environ 3 semaines, les États-Unis ont modifié le mode de calcul des tarifs sur les produits contenant de l'acier ou de l'aluminium, de telle sorte qu'environ la moitié des exportations industrielles de l'Ontario et du Québec qui vont vers les États-Unis sont désormais tarifées, alors que le gouvernement, nous dit encore que 85 des exportations vers les États-Unis ne sont pas tarifées grâce à la CEUM. Mais dans quel monde vivent-ils? Il y a 2 semaines, j'ai posé la question au premier ministre sur ce nouveau mode de calcul de tarifs. Il n'avait aucune idée de quoi je parlais. La semaine dernière, je lui en ai reparlé. Il m'a dit « Oui, je m'engage à mettre en place des mesures de transition pour les entreprises qui sont victimes de ce nouveau mode de calcul des tarifs. » Rappelons-nous qu'une entreprise qui vend aux États-Unis des produits qui contiennent même une petite quantité d'acier ou d'aluminium est désormais tarifée à 25 %, alors qu'auparavant, lorsque les pourcentages de produits d'acier ou de contenu d'acier ou d'aluminium étaient faibles, le tarif n'était pas appliqué. Le premier ministre a promis de mettre en place des mesures de transition. La mise à jour économique ne contient absolument rien. Nonobstant n'importe quel autre sujet de la mise à jour, je répondrai à vos questions avec plaisir, j'invite n'importe qui veut commenter et analyser ce budget-là à aller rencontrer les entreprises et les chambres de commerce qui, cette fois-ci, pour vrai, reçoivent en plein front un nouveau mode de calcul de tarifs, alors que le gouvernement n'a pas l'air, ça se peut pas qu'il ne le sache pas, n'a pas l'air de savoir de quoi on parle. Et c'est extraordinairement grave. L'année durant laquelle, parce que l'économie a été résiliente, parce que l'inflation a augmenté les revenus de l'État, parce que l'État n'a pas fait un certain nombre de dépenses auxquelles il s'était engagé, donc cette année où le déficit est plus faible que prévu, c'est fini. Parce que là, les entreprises commencent, on peut vous donner des noms, à faire des mises à pied ou à fermer. C'est grave et on l'a pour vrai, et c'est le secteur industriel qui est le cœur de l'économie québécoise. Outre ça, il y a une espèce de vacuité. Le gouvernement nous donne un peu l'impression, avec ces chiffres, d'annoncer la météo d'hier, de telle sorte qu'il n'y a pas de nouveau, il n'y a rien de singulièrement marquant. Il y a des redites, il y a des gorges chaudes un peu dans ça, mais qui ignorent les éléments fondamentaux et qui, encore une fois, augmentent l'argent qui est offert sous la forme de crédits d'impôt pour la séquestration carbone aux compagnies pétrolières de l'Ouest, dont le montant passe maintenant jusqu'à 14,5 milliards, et elles ont désormais le droit d'utiliser l'argent des crédits d'impôt pour payer pour de l'extraction d'hydrocarbures. Et à ça, on ajoute une promesse faîtière de préciser ce qu'allait être le fameux fonds souverain aujourd'hui. Il n'en pipe pas mot. On ne le sait pas davantage qu'on le savait, peut-être parce que la réaction n'a pas été ce à quoi il s'attendait, mais on comprend maintenant. D'habitude, un fonds de ce type-là, c'est on va chercher des revenus qui ne viennent pas des poches des contribuables, on les met dans un fonds qui est dédié à un usage particulier. Dans ce cas-ci, on prend l'argent des contribuables qui s'ajoute au déficit conséquemment pour faire la dépense, et on va donner cet argent-là pour des grands projets qui, à toute fin pratique, vont être sélectionnés par le premier ministre en disant d'emblée, ne vous attendez pas à une rentabilité si vous mettez de l'argent là-dedans. Il s'agit essentiellement de rendre rentables des projets d'exportation et des infrastructures d'exportation de pétrole qui, sans l'argent des contribuables et sans l'argent des Québécois qui s'en va dans l'Ouest, ne seront jamais rentables. Alors moi, j'ai beaucoup de questions sur ce fonds-là et j'ai beaucoup de questions à poser sur cette mise à jour économique qui ne fait pas bonne figure au terme d'une année de lune de miel où la fidélité du nouveau marié n'est pas évidente.
Le crédit d'impôt pour les pétrolières, spécifiquement, excusez, en français, Enhanced Oil Recovery en anglais. Avez-vous reçu les mêmes assurances que Mme Elizabeth May auprès du budget qui était présenté au mois de novembre que Enhanced Oil Recovery ne sera pas applicable pour des crédits d'impôt, puis ça ne reviendra pas une fois que le budget...
En fait, c'est le contraire. Le gouvernement dit désormais, en plus d'augmenter la somme, qui augmente d'à peu près 2 milliards, il dit que sous prétexte que le carbone peut être utilisé pour faire de l'extraction, en l'injectant dans le sol, ben l'extraction devient admissible pour l'utilisation du crédit d'impôt. Ça, c'est le cauchemar au terme environnemental. D'abord, la séquestration carbone, bien que théoriquement possible, est une lubie en termes économiques. C'est beaucoup trop coûteux. Personne ne veut vraiment aller là-dedans. Donc, pour que les crédits d'impôt soient utilisés, et ils deviennent franchement une subvention déguisée aux pétrolières qui vont utiliser l'argent pour faire de l'extraction de davantage de pétrole, lequel pétrole va être acheminé vers la côte ouest par de nouveaux équipements qui vont être payés, contrairement à ce que le gouvernement disait, par la poche des contribuables. Et il est absolument faux de prétendre qu'il y ait quelque avantage économique que ce soit à se procéder au bénéfice des Québécoises et des Québécois, parce que les projets d'infrastructure en question ne seront jamais, à proprement parler, rentables, d'où la nécessité pour le gouvernement de prendre l'argent des contribuables et de le couler dans ces infrastructures pétrolières.
Well, just if you'll allow me, but Elizabeth May, when the budget was presented in November, she received assurances from Stephen Guilbeault, who got assurances from the Prime Minister's office, that enhanced oil recovery would not be applicable to under CCUS, because that was in the budget that it wouldn't be there, and so she got assurances that the government wouldn't go back on that. Of course, in the Alberta MOU, we see that the government did flip-flop on that, and then now today, with the economic statement, we see that the government is following through on that. So I'm curious, did you get the same assurances as Elizabeth May from the government that it wouldn't backtrack on EOR as part of...
No such assurance exists. The government now allows the oil and gas companies to use those tax credits to extract and get more oil and gas out of the ground. And it's a very important issue because it's now up to $14.5 billion that could be used for that specific purpose. You know, if that business was to be good, was about to get some benefits, they wouldn't need government's money, but they get the money from all of us, and they keep pretending that it's good for us, which it is not. That's a huge problem because what will be extracted from the ground will be, in time, conveyed through new pipelines, which will be paid by public money through this fund, because by themselves, those infrastructures and pipelines would never be rentable. I don't know what to... No benefits to be taken out of this. So government comes to the rescue, pretending to do something which is good to make Canada stronger, but it will just dig deeper and deeper a deficit which is already becoming very dangerous.
Par rapport à la mise à jour économique, le ministre Champagne nous disait tout à l'heure que s'il n'y a pas grand-chose dedans, c'est parce qu'ils ont voulu être des gestionnaires prudents, disciplinés. Est-ce que vous pensez qu'ils le sont, prudents et disciplinés?
Tu ne peux pas, à chaque jour que le bon Dieu amène, prétendre que tu dois gérer une crise historique et sans précédent et dire, oui, mais nous allons être prudents et ne rien faire face à cette crise historique et sans précédent, surtout que la démonstration est faite. Puis j'invite ceux qui vont dire, Blanchette, il fait son partisan, allez le vérifier, là. Le premier ministre, il y a 2 semaines, n'a pas répondu, sachant pas c'était quoi ces nouveaux tarifs américains ou ce nouveau mode de calcul. Il s'est engagé la semaine dernière à prendre des mesures parce que maintenant, autour de la moitié des exportations industrielles du Québec et de l'Ontario vont être tarifées. Les entreprises sont littéralement incapables de faire face à ça. C'est une crise majeure et c'est comme s'il ne se passait rien. Et il fallait, au contraire, avoir une certaine audace. Et lorsque un gouvernement dit, bien écoutez, le déficit de l'année dernière, parce que c'est bien ce dont il s'agit, est plus bas que prévu de 11,5 milliards, essentiellement parce que, ironiquement, l'inflation a augmenté les revenus de l'État, parce que l'économie, avant les nouveaux tarifs, était plutôt résiliente, ce qui est une fort bonne chose, puis il y a des dépenses qui n'ont simplement pas fait, notamment dans le domaine environnemental. Bien, tu prends cet argent-là, tu prends cette petite marge de manœuvre et tu développes des programmes pour que les entreprises puissent s'adapter à ce coup de masse en plein front que la Maison-Blanche de Donald Trump vient d'infliger aux entreprises. Je ne sais pas comment le dire pour que les gens prennent la mesure. Parlez aux chambres de commerce, allez voir les entreprises, parlez aux gens autour de vous qui travaillent dans le secteur industriel. Et là, on est vraiment à la limite, puis ce pas des gens très exubérants, les entrepreneurs, mais on est à la limite d'une détresse rare. Et la mise à jour économique fait littéralement comme si ça n'existait pas.
Par rapport aux mesures de formation de main-d'œuvre, les 2 milliards à peu près qui vont être investis pour les apprentis et tout ça, est-ce qu'il y avait lieu pour le fédéral de lancer ce nouveau programme-là ou est-ce qu'on aurait pu donner cet argent-là aux provinces et les laisser le gérer?
Le gouvernement se comporte un peu comme un joueur compulsif. Il prend des engagements et fait des promesses qu'il ne peut pas réaliser et il escamote son insuccès par une autre promesse. Là, parce que soudainement, dans un avenir totalement imprévisible, parce que les grands chantiers, à part peut-être Contrecœur qui existait avant le gouvernement de M. Carney, il n'y a pas de nouveaux grands chantiers qui vont engager de ces travailleurs-là. C'est comme dire, un jour, soyez heureux, braves gens, ça va créer des jobs avec les 25 milliards qu'on va avoir pris dans vos poches au bénéfice des pétrolières. Mais retenez pas votre souffle, ces emplois-là n'existeront pas avant plusieurs années et ces emplois-là n'existeront pas avant que Donald Trump ait quitté la Maison-Blanche. Donc, mettre ça dans une mise à jour économique quand tu as une situation d'urgence à court terme, c'est une étrange idée.
Could we just get, in English, just what did you think of the economic update? You mentioned some concerns about tariff relief, enhanced oil recovery, and also the claim that the government is making that they reduce the deficit by being strong fiscal managers. What do you think overall of the economic
It's
update?
something of a show. Last year's deficit was reduced basically because some spendings were not made, in some cases about environmental issues, because inflation increased the government's incomes and because the economy was very resilient. But about a little less than 1 month ago, the White House imposed a new way to calculate the tariffs on transformed products. As soon as there's some steel or aluminum in a product, whatever the level of it, it's 25% tariff. It would touch, according to what we have read and understood, about half of the exports as well from Ontario as from Quebec in the United States. So this idea that 85% of exports from Canada to the United States are not touched by tariffs because they are covered by NAFTA is no more true, even if they still repeat it. And this situation, which is, I must say the right word, it's dramatic for many, many businesses, is not addressed at all. Last week, the Prime Minister promised me in the question period that there would be measures to adapt present and acting businesses, not future projects, to the situation, and the update contains absolutely not a word about that.
So it's a show.
It's much of a show. It's a lot of paper for not much to tell.
Monsieur Blanchet, just some of the legislative measures the government's looking to push through with this document, one of them includes the ability for police to search and seize mail, originally put forward in C2. Now it's in the spring economic update. What do you make of putting this kind of police power in a budget document?
I'm not sure I understood the question. Police power?
The government wants to put the ability for police to search and seize mail through the Canada Post Act. It's in this document.
I don't see so much what relates to that in the exercise of a budget. There are questions which are quite different. It's in another bill, which is presently to be discussed in committee.
They put it into this document now as well.
Yeah, but in that document that we read today, they speak about everything. They even go as far. That would be something interesting to say in French. They will consider doing some consultations about the possibility of supporting regions' media. It does not mean much, and it's anything but expensive Puis je vais le dire en français si jamais ça intéresse quelqu'un. Le budget contient une phrase qui dit « Le gouvernement va envisager de consulter les Canadiens sur des mesures pour l'avenir des médias et de l'information régionale. » Quand tu mets ça dans un budget, tu peux, pas dans un budget, dans une mise à jour économique, tu peux pas mettre un signe de pièce à côté, là. C'est, je vais peut-être envisager mercredi après-midi, si j'ai rien d'autre à faire, de penser au mot « médias », alors que les médias, l'information et ce dont se nourrit la démocratie est dans une crise sans précédent.
Clarifier sur la formation professionnelle, là, pour vous, est-ce que cette mesure-là, est-ce que le gouvernement Carney fait de l'ingérence avec ça?
Dès que le gouvernement rentre dans la formation professionnelle, sans simplement transférer les fonds aux provinces qui ont la juridiction, c'est une ingérence. Et c'est d'autant plus vrai que, dans le cas présent, je présume que le gouvernement du Québec dirait « Nous, on veut utiliser cet argent-là pour adapter les entreprises actuelles à la crise actuelle et non pas sur la base de projets qui, pour l'instant, font figure de fantasme. » Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Bonjour. Cette mise à jour économique représente une opportunité manquée pour le gouvernement libéral. Il y a beaucoup de mesures qui ont été déjà annoncées. Alors, la crise quotidienne du coût de la vie demande des grandes solutions concrètes pour les Canadiens et on ne trouve pas ces solutions ici. I think today was the Liberal government had a big opportunity today to actually address the everyday emergency of the crisis of the cost of living for Canadians with concrete measures, new programs that would actually make people's everyday lives better. It didn't do that. And not only that, there wasn't a single new revenue measure in this entire update that would actually introduce new revenue from extremely profitable corporations like the oil and gas sector, which is forecast to make $90 billion of excess wartime profits this year alone. We should have seen a windfall tax, and we called for one, and so there was a lot of revenue left on the table. The measures that the government has introduced, the grocery and essentials benefit is one that we support. We think it should be more, but it is something that we support. On the other hand, the gas tax holiday or the gas tax reduction, the middle class, so-called middle class tax cut, these are extremely expensive measures that cost billions and billions and billions of dollars every single year, and they do not fundamentally change the equation for Canadians who are struggling to put food on the table for their kids. Price of gas is already back up to $1.80 a litre in Toronto on average today. So that gas tax cut, which cost more than $2 billion a year, already gone, evaporated, swallowed up by price gouging corporations.
On the notion that there's no increased government revenue from the oil and gas sector, it's not entirely true, because by including EOR, enhanced oil recovery, into carbon capture, utilization, and storage, the government's forecasting almost $400 million over 3 years.
I would call that a new subsidy for the oil and gas industry, which was demanded by Alberta as part of the MOU with the Liberal government. This was, the whole notion of carbon capture and storage, it's supposed to be the big climate solution that's going to negate the carbon impact of extracting all the oil and gas in Canada. Instead, the industry traditionally uses it to get more oil and gas out of the ground, and the Liberal government just opened that up for Alberta. That's a subsidy to oil and gas, not a new revenue measure.
Can I actually hear from Ms. McPherson on that too? Because obviously this is one that oil and gas companies have called a game changer in your home province. I'm just wondering your take on the inclusion of EOR for CCUS credits.
Well, thank you for the question, but I think I will let the leader speak to the budget today. I think that's fair. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
The legislative changes put forward in the document. One of them.
You mean the very obscure list right at the back?
Exactly that
Okay.
one. The ability for the police to search and seize mail. We saw it in C2 initially. That got kind of sidelined for a while. Now we're seeing it in the spring economic update. Just what do you make of putting that kind of power in a budget document?
Yeah, I think it's legitimate to introduce non-monetary measures. It's a major legislative moment to bury a significant new power in the penultimate page of the document itself. It seems like more light should be shone on a measure like that. There are other measures in those legislative changes, like changes to the Canada Food Inspection Agency, that are posited as positive changes from a government that just through its cuts, to public spending, laid off 600 food inspectors at the very same time that we've just seen Loblaws and Sobeys underweighing and overcharging for meat. Again, a year after the CBC revealed that this was a common practice. So there's a lot of mixed messages here, and there isn't a singular focus on working class people who are not invited to the bankers' banquet of all of the private sector forecasters who appear at the very beginning of the document in a much larger font as the bedrock of whom the Prime Minister clearly considers his real constituency.
Building trades, there's a lot about that, investments that they're making there to get people into those sort of skilled trades. Do you see positives there? Can you get behind that, or do you see problems or issues with that?
Yeah, I think a sizable investment in skilled trade apprenticeships seems like an excellent thing. The devil is really going to be in the implementation, and we've got to see trade unions involved in how those programs are rolled out. First of all, I already saw one commentator today say that in the year 2024, there were almost 50,000 young people enrolled in skilled trade apprenticeships in Canada. So maybe 100,000 by 5 years from now is not the giant number that the sticker shock number that they're hoping. But more importantly, it is very poignant today, on the National Day of Mourning for workers killed, injured, and made ill on the job, that we don't see labor at the table or workers' issues really addressed in this economic update. Even in this marquee program of skilled trade apprenticeships, we've seen in Ontario where that money is going from the federal government to Ontario, they're not even spending it on apprenticeships. So there need to be hard strings on that money. Trade unions have to be involved in how the actual legislation is carried out, and we have no guarantee that the promise will be delivered. It is a promising program, and we want to see a lot more skilled trades, but it's got to be done right, and that means the House of Labor's got to be at the table.
Can you vote for this update?
Well, we're going to have a caucus meeting tomorrow, and we make those decisions about how we vote as a caucus, so we're going to study everything carefully.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
It might be better suited for your colleague, Ms. Gazan, but in the economic statement, there's $8 million for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Is that enough in the view of the NDP?
Yeah, I'm going to talk to Leah Gazan, our critic, about that. It seems like a very small amount compared to the large numbers that were announced a few years ago, and we're trying to determine whether that is a giant cut, which is what it looks like, or whether we just have to dig into those numbers and find out. But it's a disturbingly small number.
Justement, sur les programmes sociaux, est-ce que vous constatez qu'il y a une distance entre l'interventionnisme peut-être social de Justin Trudeau et les politiques qu'on voit avec M. Carney?
Oui, l'idée, maintenant, c'est très commun avec le gouvernement de Carney que le secteur privé va donner la salvation à tous. Et alors, c'est comme le fonds d'investissement souverain. C'est un modèle qui est un fort contraste avec la Norvège, qui est cité comme exemple. Oui, en Norvège, il y a un modèle. Il y a une compagnie publique de pétrole avec des grandes taxes et une réserve énorme de fonds pour les biens publics. Alors maintenant, ici au Canada, on cite l'exemple de Norvège, mais en fait, c'est des dons publics pour soutenir les projets privés. C'est un contraste très fort, et c'est l'approche de Carney.
One thing in the economic statement was the Canadian Olympic Committee got what it was asking for a long time, $660 million plus $110 million ongoing.
Sorry, the
Canadian Olympic Committee and National Sport Organizations, that money there. I don't know if sport policy is something you've been asked about or talked about lately, so I thought it was a good opportunity to hear your thoughts on sport policy.
It is another thing in this update that we really like. We like to see new money spent in community and programs, especially the grassroots programs. Absolutely, elite athletes need more funding in Canada, and but what's more exciting is the neighborhood level programs, and I think there's money for that too, and that is something that we support.
Are you at all considering running in Beaches East York when there's a by-election there?
Well, Mark, I didn't see anything in the spring economic update about that precise question, but it's possible there was an annex that I missed. No, I've already ruled out running in that by-election in Beaches East York. Yes, yeah. Okay. As I've said, there's plenty of work to do for me across the country, rebuilding the party, and I'm going to prioritize that for now.
Thank you.
Are you concerned about the reduction to CPP contributions that's in this budget?
Yeah, my understanding is that we're not sure. We're looking into those numbers. It must not be a reduction in benefits. And our early indications are that it shouldn't be, that doesn't imply automatically a reduction in benefits. If the fund is doing well enough that the contributions can be lowered, that's one thing. If they're lowering the contributions in order to lower the benefits, we believe that there should be appropriate pensions for all Canadians. The CPP is not enough to live on, like employment insurance is not enough to live on, like the disability benefit is legislated poverty, and so we cannot be reducing the meager supports that poor, disabled, working class, and retired Canadians have right now. So if that is the case, that benefits are being lowered, we would strongly oppose that, but we have not determined that yet.
Pour revenir à la mise à jour économique, vous dites qu'il n'y en a pas assez aujourd'hui pour les travailleurs, pour les Canadiens. Le ministre des Finances vous répondrait que le gouvernement Carney cherche à être prudent, responsable, discipliné. Qu'est-ce que vous répondez à ça?
Oui, mais les mesures comme le tax cut, the middle class et tout ça, et pour le taxe sur pétrole, ce sont des mesures très très chères. Avec c'est pas un grand bénéfice aux travailleurs et travailleuses. Maintenant, aujourd'hui, c'est $1,80 pour un litre de pétrole à Toronto. Alors, c'est disparu, cette mesure qui est plus que 2 milliards de dollars chaque année. Alors, il faut développer les programmes qui vont changer la vie quotidienne et on ne peut pas les trouver dans ce document.
Dental care and pharmacare both just got passing mentions in this document. What do you make of that in terms of these program standings with this current government?
I mean, there is one mention of the word pharmacare in this entire document, and the reality is that in the last days and weeks, we've heard from Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland, and I believe we will shortly hear from Nova Scotia that the federal government is refusing to fund the quote-unquote national pharmacare program that Heather and Dawn and the rest of our caucus won from the Supply and Confidence Agreement. It is shameful. The Carney government committed to fulfilling that program. You should not have to live in an NDP province like Manitoba or British Columbia, who were among the first to sign the pharmacare agreements with the federal government, in order to get that fundamental benefit. We should have pharmacare for all. We've been fighting for that for generations. The Liberals have been promising it since 1993. And we still don't have it, even though we won it. And that tells you everything you need to know about the priorities of this government. This government is creating a fund with tens of billions of dollars of public money to benefit these massive private projects that will make huge profits for already profitable corporations. We should be investing that kind of money in the economy of care, where Canadians work and actually take care of each other, that binds our society together. We don't see pharmacare. We don't see increased investments in healthcare. We don't see the other main demand that we made of the Prime Minister to enforce the Canada Health Act and stop the rampant privatization of healthcare in Canada. This government does not have the priorities of working class Canadians at heart. Thanks, everybody.